He said I had no ambition. He said I was too poor to deserve him. He didn't know my poverty was hiding a $600,000 fund and all the evidence I needed to destroy him. My husband and my sister took everything: my job, my house, my reputation. They left me penniless, believing I was crushed. But they forgot one thing. My grandmother never trusted a pretty smile. My name is Alara Vance. I am 38 years old, and on paper, my life in Denver, Colorado, is a study in muted perfection. The air here is thin and bright, and my days are, by design, quiet. I work part-time at the Archway Initiative, a local arts nonprofit housed in a beautifully restored brick building downtown. We connect emerging artists with public spaces. It's work that fills me, providing a quiet satisfaction that hums just beneath the surface of my skin. Then there is David, my husband. David Morrow is the opposite of quiet. He is all bright lights and forward momentum. He's an up-and-coming tech investor, a title he wears as easily as his custom-tailored suits. When David walks into a room, the energy shifts. People lean in. He has that gravitational pull, a charisma so potent it feels like a physical force. He is handsome, polished, and always the center of attention. Our life is beautiful. Our modern, glass-walled house overlooks the city lights. We host dinners where David holds court, charming investors and friends with projections and possibilities, while I ensure the wine is perfectly chilled and the conversation flows. But in the quiet moments, when the guests are gone and the house is still, the cracks appear. They are subtle, hairline fractures in the flawless facade. "It's cute that you have something to do, Alara," David will say, smiling, as I update my donor spreadsheets. He doesn't call it a job. He calls it my hobby. "The Archway Initiative does important work," I'll reply, my voice mild. "Of course, honey." "It's wonderful. Keep yourself busy." He'll kiss my forehead, but the gesture is pure condescension. He talks about my salary, when I get one, as gas money. He doesn't understand, or perhaps doesn't care, that the work means more to me than the modest paycheck. Lately, the condescension has been sharpening, honing itself into a finer blade. The main edge of that blade is my sister, Chloe. Chloe Vance is 3 years younger than me, and she lives in David's reflected light. She is his executive assistant, a position he created for her shortly after we were married. She orbits him, her admiration so overt it's almost painful to watch. She mimics his speech patterns, laughs just a fraction too loud at his jokes, and defends him with a ferocity she never ever applies to me. "David is just wired differently, Ilara," Chloe said last week, filing her nails while I balanced the grocery budget. "His brain moves at a different speed. You need to be supportive, not suspicious." Suspicious. That's the word they've begun to use for me. It's the word they use because I feel a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest whenever David handles our finances, which is always. I have no access. Not really. My name is on the joint account, but David manages it. He handles all the investments, the passwords, the portfolios. When I ask for details, his answers are breezy and vague. It's complex. "Alara, tech derivatives, seed funding. You wouldn't want to be bored with the details." "I'm not bored, David. I just want to understand where our money is." He'll sigh, a theatrical display of patience. "It's my money, technically, isn't it? From the ventures, I'm building us an empire. Honey, just trust me." But lately, the empire requires more. He's been pushing me, hard, to co-sign a loan, a massive one. He calls it the next big venture. "It's just a formality, Alara. The bank needs your signature on the line. It's for our future." I hesitated last night. "David, I'm not comfortable signing something I don't understand. Can we go over the business plan together?" His face went cold. The charming, charismatic mask slipped, and for a second, I saw something else, something hard. "You don't trust me," he said, not a question. "After everything I've given you, this house, This life. You want to stand in my way because you're scared. I'm not scared. I'm just being prudent. It's the same thing, he snapped. Chloe, who had been lingering in the kitchen, swooped in. Ilara, he's trying to build a future for you. Why are you being so difficult? It's just a signature. I looked from my husband's insulted expression to my sister's accusatory one. The two of them, a perfect, united front. I was the difficult one. I was the paranoid one. I was the one who was being unreasonable. The isolation felt like a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, forcing me to shrink. In that moment, my grandmother's face flashed in my mind. Eleonora Vance. She was a stern, frugal woman, a retired forensic accountant who lived in a tiny, spotless apartment and found luxury frivolous. She had been the only person at our wedding who didn't seem enchanted by David. I remember standing with her during the reception, David charming my relatives across the lawn. Look at him, Eleonora had muttered, sipping her tonic water. All shine and no substance. Grandma, be nice. He's my husband. She had turned to me, her gray eyes sharp and clear, cutting through the champagne haze of the day. Ilara, a man who needs to tell everyone how smart he is, isn't. Remember that. She'd squeezed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. And never trust a man whose shoes are shinier than his morals. I had laughed it off then, the cynical grumbling of an old woman. But now, standing in my glass house, feeling the chill of David's offense and my sister's judgment, my grandmother's words echoed in the silence. I didn't sign the loan papers last night. I told David I needed to sleep on it. He didn't sleep in our bed. He slept in the guest room. This morning. I feel the chill of that empty space beside me more than the Colorado air. I check my phone. No messages. I am alone in this. A painter of a perfect picture, desperately trying to ignore the rot I can feel spreading just beneath the canvas. The silence from David was a heavy, cold stone in my stomach as I drove to work. The fight, or rather, the tense, icy non-conversation, had left me feeling raw. I walked into the Archway Initiative seeking the familiar comfort of old wood, turpentine, and quiet purpose. I found two men in gray suits standing by my desk. My supervisor, Mark, was by the window, his back to me. He looked like he hadn't slept. Ilara, he said, and his voice was so strained it barely sounded like him. These gentlemen are from forensic auditing. A prickle of unease. Auditors for us did our grant proposal get flagged. The taller man stepped forward. He did not smile. Ms. Vance, we're here to investigate a significant discrepancy in the Foundation's grant fund. My stomach tightened. Discrepancy. $50,000, Ilara, Mark said, finally turning. His face was gray with exhaustion and, I saw with a jolt of shock, pity. It's gone, and it looks like you took it. The world stopped. The air in the room became thick and unbreathable. What, Mark? That's insane. You know me. I would never. The digital trail it's conclusive, the shorter auditor said, his voice flat. He gestured to my computer. The transfers were made from this terminal, using your logins, over the past 3 months. Small amounts, funneled into a single account, an account that we've traced. An account in your name. The tall one finished. No, I whispered. No, that's not possible. That's a mistake. Let me see. Let me call David. He can help. He's in tech. He can sort this out. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold it. Ilara, please, Mark said, his voice breaking. Don't make this harder. The board has been notified. Given the evidence, we have to terminate your employment, effective immediately. I stared at him. The words were just sounds, syllables with no meaning. Terminate. Employment. We are also considering criminal charges, the tall auditor added. A security guard is waiting to escort you from the building. Please gather your personal belongings. It was a nightmare. It was a fog. I don't remember walking. I vaguely recall the shame, the hot, burning shame as the security guard stood by me, his arms crossed, while I put my favorite mug, a photo of my grandmother, and a stack of unread art journals into a cardboard box. Every eye in the office was on me, a mixture of horror and accusation. I was walked out the front door, the same door I had entered with purpose for 3 years, like a common criminal. The drive home was a blur of panic. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. I was hyperventilating. $50,000. Criminal charges. My life was over. I called David, straight to voicemail. David, please, please pick up. Something terrible has happened at work. They think I stole money. I need you. Please call me. I called again. Voicemail. And again. Voicemail. I pulled into the driveway, my pristine glass house looking back at me like a mocking, indifferent stranger. I fumbled with my keys, the box under my arm, and stumbled inside. David, I yelled, my voice cracking. David, are you home? Silence. Then, a sound. A delicate clink of crystal from the kitchen. I dropped the box, scattering my life's trinkets across the entryway. I ran toward the sound, a desperate, confused hope rising in my chest. He was home. He would fix this. I skidded to a stop on the polished concrete floor. David was there, and so was Chloe. They were standing by the marble island. They were not panicked. They were not afraid. They were holding champagne flutes, the good crystal. As I watched, frozen, David raised his glass, and Chloe, beaming, touched her glass to his. They were celebrating. My brain could not process the scene. The panic, the shame, the terror of the last hour crashed against this single impossible image. David saw me. His charming smile didn't waver. It broadened. Ah, Ilara, you're home early. Chloe turned, her smile faltering for just a second before it hardened into something I had never seen before, a cold, sharp triumph. David, Chloe, what is this? My voice was a croak. Something happened at work. They fired me. They said I stole money. David took a slow sip of his champagne. He set the glass down. Ilara, really, how disappointing. Stealing from a charity? It's so common. The floor fell away. What, David? No, it wasn't me. Someone framed me. I thought you would help. Help, Chloe laughed, a high, brittle sound. Oh, Ilara, you're so naive. Who do you think found the discrepancy? She stepped forward, her eyes glittering. I was just doing my job as David's assistant, reviewing the household accounts. When I saw the transfers from your nonprofit, I had to alert the board. It was my duty. David is on their advisory council, after all. The betrayal was so absolute, so sudden, it was like a physical blow to the chest. I couldn't breathe. You did this. We did this, David corrected, his voice smooth as silk. He reached under the counter and pulled out a thick, white envelope. He slid it across the marble. It stopped right in front of me. I'm filing for divorce. I looked at the envelope. I looked at him. Divorce. I've also filed an emergency motion to have you removed from the premises. He gestured around the beautiful, empty room. Given your proven criminal activity and, frankly, your mental instability, the court will agree. You need to be out, tonight. Criminal activity, mental instability. The words he had used, the words they had planted. This was coordinated. This was a plan. The loan, my hesitation. This was my punishment. I stared at the man I had loved, the man I had built a life with, and I saw a stranger, cold, reptilian, and utterly in control. You won't get anything, he said, as if reading my mind. The house, the accounts. It's all in my name, my ventures. You brought nothing to this marriage. Ilara, you're leaving with nothing. He picked up his glass again. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my sensible shoes and my simple non-profit worker clothes. The contempt in his eyes was a physical thing. "I told you," he said, his voice quiet, final. "You're too weak and too poor for this world. You just can't keep up." I had 30 minutes. A police officer, civilly, stood by the front door while Chloe watched me from the kitchen, tapping her polished nails on the marble. David was gone, already off to important meetings. I packed a single suitcase. What do you pack for the end of your life? I took jeans, sweaters, my toothbrush. I left behind the jewelry David had given me. I left behind the designer bags I never liked. I left behind the entire scaffolding of a life that was never really mine. By the time I was sitting in my car at a gas station 10 miles away, the sun was setting, casting a sickeningly beautiful orange glow over the mountains. I pulled out my phone to transfer money from our joint savings, just enough for a hotel. The balance was 0. I refreshed the screen. 0. I refreshed again. 0. A cold dread, colder than the shame, colder even than the betrayal, seeped into my bones. He had not left me with nothing. He had taken everything. Even the small emergency fund I had carefully maintained from my paychecks before we were married. It was all gone, swept into the void of his ventures. My hands started shaking again. I tried to think. Friends. I had friends. I called Sarah, my oldest friend in Denver. Voicemail. "Sarah, it's Alara. I'm in some trouble. I really need to talk to you. Can you call me back?" I called another friend, then a third. All of them, straight to voicemail. I sat in my car in the growing dark, the digital glow of the gas pump mocking me. I scrolled through my social media feed, looking for, I don't know what, a sign. And I found one. A local news blog had already posted it. Program director at the Archway Initiative fired amid embezzlement scandal. My name, my photo. The article mentioned $50,000 and pending criminal charges. The nonprofit had officially filed the police report. The texts, the unreturned calls, it all made sense. The news had spread. In David's world, judgment was instant and absolute. I was not just unemployed. I was a pariah, a thief. I had nowhere to go. The reality of that phrase was absolute. I had no home, no money, and a warrant was likely being issued for my arrest. I looked in my wallet. I had $212 in cash. I looked in my glove compartment. I had a bottle of water and a handful of napkins. I drove until the city lights were a faint smear in my rearview mirror. I found a pawn shop in a strip mall that smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. I took off the only piece of jewelry I had packed, a simple gold locket, the one my mother had left me. The man behind the glass barely looked at it. $150, he grunted. It's antique, I whispered, tears blurring my vision. $150, take it or leave it. I took it. The cash felt dirty, heavier than the locket ever had. I found a motel off the highway, the kind with a flickering neon sign and a sign in the lobby that said, "Weekly rates available." The room cost me half of my locket money for the week. It smelled of bleach and old carpet. I locked the deadbolt, pushed the cheap dresser in front of the door, and slid to the floor. The next 3 days were a blur of terror. I bought a prepaid phone. I called legal aid services, my voice hollow. The first woman cut me off. "Financial crimes, ma'am. We handle evictions and custody. We can't help you." The second one was more patient, but the answer was "Your case is far too complex for our resources. You're accused of embezzling $50,000. You need a private attorney." "I don't have any money," I explained, the words scraping my throat. "I'm sorry, Ms. Vance. There's nothing we can do." I was toxic. Too complicated for the free services, too poor for the real ones. A perfect trap. On the 4th night, I couldn't sleep. The thin walls of the motel did nothing to block out the sounds of the highway or the couple fighting in the next room. I was staring at the water-stained ceiling when my prepaid phone buzzed. It was an alert from a society blog I had forgotten to unfollow. There they were, David and Chloe. They were at a gala, some tech fundraiser. David was in a tuxedo, his arm firmly around Chloe's waist. She was wearing a stunning, backless red dress. They looked radiant. They looked happy. They looked like the new power couple. The caption read, David Morrow and Chloe Vance, celebrating new beginnings. A wave of nausea so profound washed over me that I barely made it to the bathroom in time. I retched until I was empty, my throat raw, kneeling on the cold, cracked linoleum. He had not just taken my life. He had given it to my sister. I sat there, defeated, my mind a blank, gray void. I had nothing. I was nothing. I was exactly what he said I was, weak and poor. And then, a thought. A flicker, so faint I almost missed it. It was a memory, a voice. My grandmother, Eleonora, her will. When she had passed away 5 years ago, she had left me her small apartment's contents and something else. A line item I had barely registered at the time, lost in grief. To my granddaughter, Alara, I also leave the contents of storage unit B12 at Iron Mountain Storage, 48th and Main. I had never been. I assumed it was just old furniture, dusty books, remnants of a frugal life she didn't want to throw away. I fumbled in my suitcase, in the side pocket of my purse. I still had the ring of old keys she had given me, the one with the odd, small, silver key. I never knew what it was for. B12. I checked my wallet. I had just under $100 left. I found the number for the storage facility. My voice was shaking when I called. Yes, I'm calling about Unit B12. The name is Eleonora Vance. That unit is 3 months past due, the man on the phone said, his voice bored. It's scheduled for auction on the 1st of the month. That's in 2 days. How much? I asked, my heart pounding. To bring it current $95. $95. Almost every cent I had. I'll be right there, I said. I'm coming to pay it. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just moving, driven by a ghost. I was hoping for an old painting, a piece of silver, anything I could sell to buy one more week in this hellhole. I had no idea I was walking toward the only thing that could save me. Iron Mountain Storage was in an industrial part of town I had never visited. The building was a vast, windowless block of corrugated metal, painted a depressing beige. I paid the $95 at the front desk, leaving me with $6 and some change. The manager, a man who seemed permanently tired, didn't even look up as he took my cash. He just slid a map of the facility and a large, disc-shaped padlock toward me. Unit B12 is on the 2nd floor, North Corridor. You've got access for 30 days. Don't let the door slam. The elevator smelled like rubber and dust. The corridor was a long, sterile hallway of identical roll-down metal doors, lit by buzzing fluorescent lights. B12. I cut the old, brittle, red-tagged auction lock with the bolt cutters the manager had loaned me and fumbled with the new padlock. My hands were slick with a cold sweat. I pulled the chain, and the metal door rolled up with a deafening, grinding scream. I stood at the threshold, my eyes adjusting to the dim light inside. I had expected I don't know. Piles of musty clothes, stacks of old magazines, a broken headboard, the smell of mildew and decay. The unit was the exact opposite. It was immaculate, spotlessly clean. There was no furniture, save for a single tall gray metal shelving unit against the back wall. Lined up on the floor, in 3 perfect rows, were 10 standard-sized black filing cabinets. Each one was labeled with a simple white tag and a number, and each one was secured with a heavy-duty padlock. This wasn't a storage unit. This was an archive. My hope for a quick sale item vanished, replaced by a deep, unsettling confusion. This was not the grandmother I knew. Or was it my grandmother? The forensic accountant? The woman of ledgers and sharp pencils? I walked inside, my footsteps echoing on the concrete. The air was dry, smelling only of old paper and metal. I tried the handle on the first filing cabinet. Locked. The second. Locked. All of them. I scanned the shelves. Neatly stacked were dozens of black, cloth-bound accounting ledgers, the kind with red spines. They were all labeled by year, 1990, 1991, her entire career, seemingly archived. On the top shelf, there was a single, heavy, black iron strongbox. It looked old, like something from a turn-of-the-century office. It, too, was locked. A wave of frustration washed over me. I had spent my last dollar to access a room full of locked boxes. It was a perfect, cruel metaphor for my life. I sank onto the cold floor, the metal door looming behind me. I was trapped, in every possible sense. I sat there for a long time, just breathing in the sterile, papery air. Think, Elara. Think like her. My grandmother was a creature of habit and meticulous systems, a place for everything and everything in its place. She hated complications, but she loved secrets. I remembered her telling me once, never hide one thing in one place. Always hide the key with the lock, just not on the lock. My eyes went back to the ledgers. They were the most obvious things in the room, stacked high. I stood up and ran my fingers along the spines. I pulled out the top one, labeled Volume 1. It was heavy. I opened it. Just blank, lined pages. I put it back and picked up the next one. Also blank. I picked up the third one. It felt different. I turned it over in my hands. And there, taped to the bottom, hidden from view against the shelf, was a small, flat, iron key. My grandmother's old trick, hiding the key beneath the ledger. My heart was doing a strange, heavy beat against my ribs. I took the strongbox down from the shelf. It was heavier than I expected. I put the key in the lock. It turned with a satisfying, oily click. I lifted the heavy lid. There was no cash, no jewelry, just 3 items resting on dark velvet lining. The first was a simple blue bank passbook, its cover slightly faded. The bank's name wasn't one I recognized, Mountain View Credit Bank, and it wasn't a Denver address. It was in another state. The second was a small, single, silver key, attached to a metal tag stamped with a 4-digit number, a safe deposit box key. The third was a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name, Elara, was written on the front in my grandmother's sharp, precise, angular script. My hands were shaking so badly I almost tore the paper. I broke the wax seal she had sealed it with her E.V. signet and pulled out a single, folded sheet of stationery. The note was short. Elara, men like David Morrow don't make money. They take it. Never trust a man whose shoes are shinier than his morals. Check the ledgers. I read the words 3 times. David Morrow. Not your husband. Not David. His full, formal name, as if he were a case file. A cold dread, far more profound than my fear of poverty, settled over me. She had known. The letter's command was simple. Check the ledgers. I looked at the shelf full of ledgers. Which ones I looked at the ledger still in my hand, the one that had hidden the key. I set the strongbox aside and opened it. I had been wrong. It wasn't blank. It just looked that way at first. The first page was a table of contents, written in her tiny, perfect print. But this wasn't about her finances. The title at the top of the page read, Subject David Morrow, File Initiation, June 4th, 2017. I stopped breathing. June 4th, 2017. I met David in May of 2018. She had started this investigation a full year before he ever entered my life. I flipped the page, my blood running cold. The first entry was a summary. Subject David Morrow, a.k.a. David West, presumed. D.M. Ventures. Subject recognized from file consultation. Evergreen Retirement Case, 2015. That case involved a small-scale Ponzi scheme targeting retirees in Aspen. Primary operator vanished. Subject Morrow, a junior associate at the time, was interviewed but claimed to be a victim. No evidence to the contrary. Case went cold. Subject has resurfaced in Denver Tech Angel sector. High-end lifestyle. No verifiable source of income. Pattern is identical. Commencing surveillance. I couldn't feel my hands. I couldn't feel my feet. I was reading a private investigation file. I turned the pages. A blur of dates, license plate numbers, names of associates, chance meetings at high-end bars. It was all there. A meticulous 6-year operation. Then I saw the entry that made my stomach drop. April 12th, 2018. Subject attended Archway Initiative fundraiser. Met Ilara. My God, I kept reading. May 14th, 2018. Ilara brought him to dinner. Subject is charming, polished. Shoes are Italian, hand-stitched. Cost approximately $2,000. Declared income last year 0. Ilara is blind to it. She sees what he wants her to see. This wasn't a warning. This was a war journal. My grandmother, the quiet, frugal accountant, had been running a deep surveillance operation on my boyfriend, my fiancé, my husband, for our entire relationship. She had seen the fraud case I was living in, even when I thought it was a love story. I looked at the rows of locked filing cabinets. I looked at the bank book and the safe deposit key in the iron box. This wasn't a storage unit. It was an arsenal, and my grandmother, from beyond the grave, had just handed me the ammunition. The despair I'd felt in that motel room began to burn away, replaced by a cold, sharp, righteous fury. I clutched the iron strongbox to my chest as I walked out of the storage facility, my steps quick and sure. The $6 in my wallet didn't matter. The warrant for my arrest didn't matter. The shame I had felt an hour ago was a distant memory, burned away by a cold, white-hot rage. I was no longer a victim running from a fire. I was an heiress walking into an arsenal. I drove back to the motel, but I saw it differently now. It was no longer a prison. It was a bunker. I double-locked the door, pushed the dresser back in front of it, and sat on the edge of the lumpy bed. I laid out the contents of the box, the bank passbook, the silver key, and Eleonora's note. My hands were steady as I picked up the prepaid phone and dialed the number for Mountain View Credit Bank. It was a small, independent bank, the kind that still valued privacy. A polite voice answered, "Mountain View Credit, how can I help you?" I'm calling to inquire about an account," I said, my voice low. "A trust. My name is Ilara Vance. It would have been established by my grandmother, Eleonora Vance." There was a pause, then the click of a keyboard. Yes, the Eleonora Vance Trust. We're very familiar with your grandmother's file." The banker's voice was warm, professional. "For verification, can you please provide your mother's maiden name and your date of birth?" I gave them. "And a final question, Ms. Vance. Per your grandmother's security notes, what was the name of the dog she rescued from the accounting firm's fire drill?" A small, genuine smile touched my lips. "Ledger. His name was Ledger." "Thank you, Ms. Vance. You are verified." The banker's tone shifted, becoming more personal. "We've been waiting for your call. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman." My throat tightened. "She was... Can you tell me the status of the account?" "Of course. The trust was fully funded upon her passing and has been managed, per her instructions, in a low-risk, high-yield portfolio. It is active and solely accessible by you." "And the balance," I whispered, afraid to say the number aloud. "The current balance, as of this morning, is $600,212.44. $600,000. I closed my eyes. It wasn't just money. It was time. It was lawyers. It was safety. It was a weapon. It was everything David thought I didn't have. "Ms. Vance?" the banker asked, sensing my silence. "There's a note here I'm instructed to read to you when you called. Ilara. This is your go-to-hell fund. It is structured as an irrevocable spendthrift trust. It is legally invisible. It cannot be seen by creditors. It cannot be touched in a divorce proceeding, and it cannot be linked to your public social security number. It is clean. Use it. My grandmother, the forensic accountant, she had won a quiet, massive lawsuit against a corrupt firm years ago and had hidden the proceeds, not for herself, but for me. She had seen David coming before he was even on the horizon. I understand, I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. Thank you. I need to wire a small amount, immediately, for a retainer. After I hung up, I sat in the silence, the passbook in my hand. The first part of the key was secure. Now for the second, I looked at the silver safe deposit key. The attached tag had the name of a local, downtown Denver bank, a mainstream one. I put on the sunglasses I'd found in my glove compartment and a cheap baseball cap I'd bought at the gas station. I walked into the bank lobby at 3 p.m, my heart pounding a hole in my chest. I was a wanted woman, walking into a bank, but I had no choice. The vault manager was a stern woman who led me into the secure room without a word. I signed Eleonora's name on the access card, my hand a perfect, steady forgery. She inserted her key. I inserted mine, and she pulled out a long, narrow, metal box. She slid it to me and left, closing the heavy door. I was alone, surrounded by the wealth of strangers. I lifted the lid. It was packed. More ledgers, identical to the ones in storage. But these were different. These were the originals. Tucked beside them were 3 plastic-cased USB drives labeled Copy A, Copy B, and Master. And beneath them, a stack of certified, notarized documents. I didn't stay. I didn't read. I swept the entire contents of the box into my empty suitcase, walked out of the vault, and didn't look back. Back in the motel, I laid it all out. The paper, the drives. It was an overwhelming archive of David's entire fraudulent life. I plugged one of the USB drives into my cheap laptop. The files were perfectly organized. Victims, shellcore, offshore accounts. And then I saw it. The big one. The master plan. David had no tech ventures. It was a lie. He was running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, exactly as my grandmother had suspected. The ledgers, the real ones, showed he was targeting wealthy, elderly investors, the very people he charmed at galas. He would promise them access to pre-IPO tech, and instead, he would just funnel their money into his personal offshore accounts, paying out small dividends from new investors' money to keep the illusion going. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was a folder labeled Phase 2 The Archway Project. I opened it. He hadn't met me by chance. He had targeted me. He had researched the Archway Initiative, a respected, slightly old-fashioned nonprofit with a steady flow of high-end, untraceable private donations. It was, in his words from a memo I found, the perfect old money washing machine. He married me to get in, to get a legitimate social climbing reason to be on their donor lists, their advisory councils. His plan, laid out in horrifying detail, was to use his access to slowly, systematically, replace their legitimate donation portals with his own, laundering his stolen Ponzi money through the charity, mixing it with real donations until it was pristine. And Chloe, my sister, she wasn't just his lover, blinded by his charm. She was a key component. The files contained spreadsheets she had created. She was the one who had hacked into the nonprofit's back end. She was his active, willing accomplice. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that made me physically ill, was a file labeled Test Run EV. Ilara Vance. Me. The $50,000. The theft they had pinned on me. It was their first, small-scale test of the laundering system. They had created the fake account in my name, transferred the funds from Archway to it, and then discovered the theft themselves. It was a test to see if the digital trail could be manipulated, if the board would panic, and if the blame would stick. It had worked perfectly. I wasn't just a wife to be discarded. I was a loose end to be framed, a convenient scapegoat for their beta test. I closed the laptop. The motel room was dark now. The neon sign outside pulsed, casting a sick, red light on the wall. I felt no fear, no sadness. The person who had been framed, the wife who had been betrayed, she was gone. I sat in the dark, the $600,000 passbook in one hand, the USB drive full of his entire criminal enterprise in the other. He said I was too poor for his world. He had no idea. He was playing his game, and I was just a pawn. But my grandmother, Eleonora Vance, had been playing a different game entirely, and she had just handed her queen the board. I left the motel before sunrise. I didn't check out. I just left the key in the room and vanished. The woman who had checked in, the weepy, broke, terrified Alara Vance, ceased to exist. I used the freshly wired funds from my Go to Hell account to lease a private, high-security corporate apartment on the other side of Denver. I paid 6 months up front, using a cashier's check. The lease was under the name Eleonora James, a tribute. The apartment was sterile, furnished in shades of gray and chrome, and had an unlisted entry. It was perfect, a fortress. From this new, clean base of operations, I made my first 2 calls. I didn't look for help. I shopped for weapons. My first wire transfer for $100,000 was the retainer for Julian Croft. His name was a legend in Denver financial circles, a name whispered with equal parts awe and terror. He was the accountant you hired when you wanted to find every last cent and then find the blood a person squeezed it from. He was expensive. He was terrifying. He was exactly what I needed. My second wire was for Annalise Harding. She was a defense attorney who specialized in complex financial fraud. Her reputation was built on dismantling the prosecution's case, finding the one thread that unraveled the whole thing. She was known for flipping cases, for turning the accusers into the accused. I set up a meeting with both of them, together, in a private conference room at Annalise's firm. I walked in, not with a suitcase of my grandmother's archives, but with a new, sleek, encrypted laptop and a single hard drive. They were a stark contrast. Annalise was sharp, dressed in a severe black suit, her silver hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. Julian Croft was rumpled, overweight, and looked like he'd slept in his tweed jacket. "Ms. James," Annalise began, her voice crisp, "your retainer cleared. You've been very mysterious. You said on the phone you were being framed for embezzlement." "That's the simple version," I said. I slid the laptop onto the conference table and opened it. "What I am is the executor of a 6-year private investigation into a man named David Morrow." I plugged in the drive. I brought up the master file. "And I am also the primary target of his current Ponzi scheme." For 2 hours, I laid it all out. The shell core, the list of elderly victims, the plan to use the Archway Initiative as a money laundering machine. The test run that was my framing. I spoke in the calm, precise language of my grandmother's notes. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I presented the facts. When I was done, Annalise was staring at me, her pen hovering over her legal pad. Julian Croft, however, was leaning forward. His eyes, which had seemed sleepy, were now bright and intense. He took the laptop and began to click, his fingers flying faster than I would have thought possible. He was silent for a full 10 minutes, digging through the files, the offshore accounts, the transfer logs my grandmother had so meticulously tracked. Finally, he let out a low whistle. He looked up at me, not with pity, but with a profound professional respect. "Ms. Vance," he said, using my real name for the first time. "Your grandmother, Eleonora Vance. The E.V. from the Evergreen case. You knew her. Knew her. Everyone in my field knew of her. She was a ghost, a legend." He gestured to the screen, to the intricate web of deceit I had just shown him. She did 90% of my work for me. This isn't just an investigation. This is a work of art. The man is utterly, completely, and beautifully trapped. He just doesn't know it yet. Annalise Harding smiled. It was not a nice smile. He will, she said. Julian, can you get me a certified statement of asset movement today? I can get you a minute-by-minute log of every dime he's stolen for the last 5 years. Julian grunted, already typing again. Good, Annalise said, turning to me. Here's what happens now. First, we stop the bleeding. I'm filing a countersuit to his divorce petition. We're also filing an emergency, ex parte motion to freeze every known asset belonging to David Morrow, his shell companies, and, she looked at a name on the file. Ms. Chloe Vance. He'll be notified, I said. He'll be notified as it's happening. She corrected. He'll get the alert from his bank that his accounts are frozen, and he'll get the email from the court at the same time. No warning. No time to move a thing. While Annalise began to draft the motions, I made my own calls. My first was to the board of directors at the Archway Initiative, to Mark. I used a burner app, my voice disguised. Mr. Reynolds, I said, using the chairman's name. I understand you have an Alara Vance problem. I am calling to inform you that you do not. You have a David Morrow problem. Mrs. Vance was framed. I am sending a file to your legal counsel in 5 minutes that will prove, unequivocally, who the real thief is, and that your $50,000 loss was just the beginning. Cooperate, and you may save your organization. Don't, and you'll be named as a co-conspirator in a federal fraud case. I hung up. My second call was to the SEC's whistleblower hotline. I didn't need to disguise my voice. I just needed to be precise. I read, almost verbatim, from Eleonora's file summary. I used the words Ponzi, interstate wire fraud, elderly victims, and securities violations. I gave them the names of the top 5 shell corporations and the offshore bank in the Caymans. I gave them enough specific, verifiable, high-level terminology to ensure my complaint wasn't just put in a queue, it was put on a hot desk. That night, back in my fortress, I watched. The first ripple came at 9:30 p.m. Julian Croft had set up alerts. An email pinged. Asset transfer attempted. The subject line read, Morrow, D. Swiss private, blocked. He had gotten the news. The freeze was in place. David, the man who lived by the electronic transfer, was trapped. A minute later, another ping. Vance, C. Checking account, blocked. They were blindsided. They were in their glass house, their victory champagne barely flat, and the walls I had built were already closing in. They were trying to run, trying to move the money, but it was too late. Julian was watching every move. My grandmother's net, woven 6 years ago, was finally being drawn tight, and I was the one holding the rope. For 2 days. I watched the digital storm. Julian's monitoring software was a ticker tape of pure panic. David was a rat in a digital maze, slamming into walls he didn't know I had built. He tried to move money from his Cayman's account. It was locked. He tried to liquidate his tech portfolio. It was frozen. He tried to draw on his line of credit. It was suspended. He was, for the first time in his life, as poor as he had always accused me of being. I knew he wouldn't stay passive. A man like David doesn't just lose, he rages. I had taken his power, his money. He would come for me, the only asset he thought he still controlled. It happened on the 3rd day. I was returning from a grocery run, my head down, baseball cap pulled low. The corporate apartment's underground garage was quiet, echoing with the hum of expensive air filtration. As I walked from my car to the elevator, a figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. You're hard to find. Alara. My heart didn't stop. It didn't pound. It just hardened. I stopped, my bag of groceries hanging from my hand. It was David. But it wasn't David. The bespoke suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt. The charming, camera-ready smile was gone, replaced by a tight, feral snarl. His eyes were bloodshot, pupils wide with a mixture of sleeplessness and pure, uncut fury. "Where is it?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "Where is what?" "David." I kept my voice perfectly level, almost bored. "The money, the accounts. What did you do?" He stalked toward me, all pretense of civility gone. This was the man behind the mask. "Where did you get the money to do this?" "Do what? Don't play dumb with me," he roared, the sound echoing off the concrete. The freeze. "The lawyers." "You don't have that kind of cash. You don't have anything. You're nothing." He was inches from me now, his face contorted. He raised a hand, and for a split second, I saw the motion, the intent to grab me, to shake me, to break me. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, right in his wild eyes. "You're right, David," I said, my voice as cold and clean as the air in that garage. "I am poor. I don't have that kind of power." I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting him hang on the single, impossible fact of my actions. But my grandmother wasn't. His face went blank. The rage was momentarily eclipsed by a profound, sputtering confusion. Your grandmother. The old, what are you talking about?" "You said I was too weak for this world," I said, stepping around him toward the elevator. "You were wrong. I was just playing the wrong game. Enjoy the new rules." I left him standing there, his mouth open, finally understanding that the pawn he had sacrificed was the one that had taken his king. The real checkmate, however, was happening in Annalise Harding's office. The next day, Annalise had scheduled the deposition for Chloe Vance. Chloe arrived, not in her usual red dress power play attire, but in a sober, dark gray suit. She looked nervous, but still arrogant, still insulated by David's perceived power. I was in the next room, watching through a one-way mirror. Julian Croft beside me, sipping a lukewarm coffee. For the first hour, Annalise was polite. She let Chloe build her narrative, lie by lie. "I was just his assistant. Yes. I noticed the discrepancies. Yes. I felt it was my duty to report them. Ilara. She was unstable, very emotional. David was so worried about her. Chloe was a good liar. She was almost believable." Annalise let her spin her web, nodding, taking notes. Then, Annalise leaned forward. "Ms. Vance, you've testified that your relationship with Mr. Morrow was purely professional. Is that correct?" "Yes," Chloe said, a little too quickly. "And you believed he was a legitimate tech investor?" "Of course. He's a genius." Annalise slid a single document across the polished mahogany table. "Then you must have been very excited for him. Exhibit A, a travel itinerary. Booked 2 days ago. It's a one-way ticket, first class, from Denver to Zurich, departing tomorrow morning." Chloe stared at the paper. I could see the color drain from her face, even through the glass. I don't understand. A business trip." "That's what I thought, too," Annalise said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But I had my team pull the passenger manifest. And, oh, this is so awkward. It's just for one passenger, David Morrow." Chloe's hand, the one with the perfectly polished nails, began to tremble. "He's leaving, Chloe," Annalise said, her voice dropping, becoming intimate, conspiratorial. "He's leaving you. The man you've been sleeping with, the man you've committed wire fraud for, the man you helped frame your own sister. He's cashing out his last hidden chip and running, and he's leaving you here to take the fall. All of it." "No," Chloe whispered. "No, he wouldn't." "He already has. The SEC is unsealing their indictment on Monday, an indictment based on my anonymous tip. When they find him gone, who do you think they're going to arrest? The genius who vanished, or the loyal executive assistant whose name is on all the domestic transfer logs? His lawyers will paint you as the mastermind, the lovesick, manipulative woman who took advantage of his trust. Annalise leaned in. Julian Croft, my forensic accountant, says your personal exposure is 20 years, minimum. 20 years in a federal prison. Chloe, because you trusted a pretty smile. That was it. The phrase. My grandmother's phrase. Chloe broke. It was not a single crack. It was a complete, structural collapse. A raw, guttural sob tore out of her, a sound of such profound, animalistic despair that even I, who hated her, felt a cold jolt. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking, her expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume on a terrified child. He promised me, she wept, her words muffled. He promised he would take me with him. He said I was smarter than her. He said I was his partner. You're not his partner, Annalise said, her voice hard again. You're his scapegoat. She pushed a second piece of paper across the table. This, however, is a deal from the district attorney, a proffer. You tell us everything. You give us David. You become our star witness. You testify against the man who was going to leave you to rot. Chloe looked up, her face a ruin of mascara and terror. You bury him, Annalise said, or he buries you. I'll do it, Chloe whispered, her voice raw. I'll do it. I'll tell you everything. He targeted her. He targeted Ilara from the beginning. It was all a plan. The job, the marriage, all of it. He made me. I helped him. I helped him do it all. From behind the glass, Julian Croft just took another sip of his coffee. Checkmate, he muttered. Chloe's confession was the key. Annalise didn't just give it to the local DA, she gift-wrapped it, along with Julian's entire report, and hand-delivered it to the regional head of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The anonymous tip I had given them had primed the engine. Chloe's signed, tear-stained affidavit was the high-octane fuel. The result was not a quiet investigation. It was a thunderclap. 2 days later, at 10 a.m., a time chosen for maximum media exposure, a dozen federal agents in dark blue windbreakers with SEC printed in bold yellow letters walked into the lobby of David's gleaming downtown office building. They didn't just have a warrant, they had a battering ram, though they didn't need to use it. They descended on his venture office, a high-gloss, mostly empty space designed to impress investors, and began carrying out servers, file boxes, and computers. By noon, the story had broken. The local news affiliate, the same one that had gleefully reported on my embezzlement, led their broadcast with it. Denver's Tech Midas, David Morrow, was taken into custody today during a federal raid on his offices. The narrative I had carefully crafted was now public domain. The up-and-coming tech investor was recast as a predatory Ponzi schemer. The charming, charismatic genius was now a cold, calculating monster. The moment the story hit the wires, the dam of silence broke. The elderly investors, the ones my grandmother had listed in her ledgers, were no longer silent victims, afraid of their own financial ruin. They were furious. They saw a path to justice. One by one, they started to speak to the press, and their stories were heartbreaking. A retired teacher who had lost her entire pension, a widower who had invested his wife's life insurance, hoping to build a college fund for his grandchildren. They stood on the steps of their modest homes, their faces etched with a grief that went beyond money, and they all told the same story, David Morrow, with his beautiful suits and his beautiful promises, had ruined them. My name was suddenly, miraculously, cleared. The media narrative, which loves a clear villain, now had one. And they had a clear victim. The board of directors at the Archway Initiative, seeing the tide turn so violently, went into full panic mode. They weren't just embarrassed, they were implicated. Their organization now tied to a massive, dirty money scandal. Their first act was to save themselves. they issued a full public apology. Not just a press release, but a televised statement from the chairman of the board, Mark Reynolds, his face pale and drawn. The Archway Initiative offers its most profound, unreserved apology to Ms. Ilara Vance. He read, his voice shaking. We were the victims of a sophisticated, malicious fraud, and Ms. Vance was, we now know, the primary target of that fraud. We relied on information that was deliberately fabricated to frame an innocent woman. We have filed our own criminal suit against Mr. David Morrow and his accomplice, Ms. Chloe Vance, for fraud and theft. My name was clean. My reputation, in a single news cycle, was restored. But I wasn't finished. While David was in a holding cell, trying to make sense of a world that had just evaporated, I made my final move. I walked into the main downtown branch of my new bank, the one that held my $600,000 fortress. I had Annalise draft a letter. Then, I wired $50,000, the exact amount I had been accused of stealing, directly to the Archway Initiative. It was accompanied by the letter from Annalise, which was, of course, leaked to the press within an hour. While Ms. Vance is the clear victim in this horrific crime, she does not wish to see the arts community suffer. Please accept this personal donation of $50,000 to cover the immediate shortfall created by Mr. Morrow's crimes. She has every faith that the organization will recover. I hadn't just been vindicated, I had just become a philanthropist. I wasn't the woman who was framed. I was the woman who had, in an act of supreme grace, saved the organization that had wrongly accused her. The PR narrative was locked. The story was over, and I had written the ending. David's was just beginning. He made bail, a staggering amount posted by a bondsman who clearly hadn't seen the asset freeze order yet. He walked out of the detention center into a wall of cameras. No lawyers, no Chloe, just 100 microphones being shoved in his face. He looked like a ghost. He returned to the glass house, only to find 2 tow trucks already there. The asset freeze was total. The court, acting on Julian's data, had begun the process of seizure. They were repossessing his leased Maserati. They were towing his leased Range Rover. I watched from a news helicopter feed as he stood on his own perfect lawn, screaming at the tow truck drivers, a king with no subjects, no crown, and no power. He was a social pariah, the galas, the parties, the inner circles he was radioactive. His name was a synonym for fraud. The final, most beautiful cut came a day later. His high-priced, white shoe legal team, the ones he had on retainer for his ventures, formally filed a motion to withdraw as his counsel. The reason, stated in the dry legal language of the court filing, was simple. His checks had bounced. The $100,000 retainer he had sent them, drawn from an account that was now frozen solid, had been clawed back. The man who had called me poor, who had built an empire on illusion, was now, in reality, completely and totally bankrupt. He had no money, no friends, no sister, and no lawyers. He was alone, in a glass house he was about to be evicted from, waiting for a trial he could not, under any circumstances, win. The courtroom was a circus, but a quiet, somber one. Every seat was filled. The front rows were a sea of gray hair and grim faces. The retirees, the widows, the victims David had bled dry. Behind them, the press, a dozen reporters, pens poised over notepads. I sat at the prosecution's table, not as a defendant, but as the primary victim. Annalise Harding was beside me, her posture rigid, her file containing only 1 sheet of paper. Julian Croft sat behind us, looking, as always, like he had just rolled out of a hedge. Then, they brought David in. The change was shocking. The last time I had seen him, in the garage, he was enraged, but still David. Now, he was a hollowed-out shell. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by an ill-fitting one provided by the court. He was thinner, his skin a pale, sallow gray, He was shackled at the wrists and ankles, and beside him, looking overwhelmed and exhausted, was a young, earnest man with a rumpled tie, his court-appointed lawyer. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. The man who had mocked my gas money salary, who had left me penniless and facing a criminal charge, was now relying on the public defender's office. He, like I had been, was toxic. Too poor for a real lawyer, too complex for an easy plea. He didn't look at me. He stared at the wooden table in front of him, a man completely and finally broken. The proceedings were a blur of legal formalities. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for eviscerating white-collar criminals, had agreed to consolidate the state criminal charges and the divorce proceedings into one hearing. It was efficient. It was brutal. "The prosecution calls its first witness," the DA said. "Ms. Chloe Vance." My sister walked in. She looked as depleted as David. Her hair was its natural brown. She wore no makeup. She was just a woman, stripped of her borrowed, glittering armor. She wouldn't look at me, and she wouldn't look at David. She just looked at the judge. Her testimony was devastating, delivered in a monotone, tearless voice. The prosecutor walked her through everything. "Ms. Vance, whose idea was it to target your sister?" "Elara Vance." "David's," she whispered. He called it symbiotic. He said he needed a wife with a clean, respectable background, someone who worked at a place like the Archway. He said it was the perfect cover." "And your role?" I was his partner. I helped him get access to their systems. I helped him identify the donors. Did you help him frame your sister for the theft of $50,000? Chloe's eyes closed. "Yes," he said. He said she was a loose end, that she was getting suspicious, and this was the cleanest way to cut her out. He said she was weak and wouldn't fight back. For 30 minutes, she laid out the entire conspiracy. The plan to marry me, the plan to launder the Ponzi money, the plan to frame me and use my instability as the reason for the divorce. It was a cold, calculated, evil thing, and she recited it like a catechism she had memorized in hell. When she was done, there was a heavy, disgusted silence in the room. The next witness was Julian Croft. He was, by contrast, almost cheerful. He loved this part. He rolled in a cart stacked high with my grandmother's black, cloth-bound ledgers. "Mr. Croft," the DA said. "Can you explain these documents?" "In simple terms," Julian said, gesturing to the pile. "This is the most perfect, meticulous pre-mortem of a financial crime I have ever seen in my 30-year career. This," he tapped the top ledger, "is Eleonora Vance's work. What I did was just confirm it." For an hour, Julian walked the court through David's entire fraudulent life. He showed the money coming in from the retirees. He showed it moving to the shell corporations. He showed the tiny, insulting dividends being paid out. He showed the money David spent on suits, on cars, on the glass house. He showed, with an undeniable, clear red line, the $50,000 transfer from the Archway through the account in my name and directly into an offshore account David controlled. The evidence was not just a smoking gun, it was a volcano. When it was the defense's turn, the young court-appointed lawyer did his best. He stood up, shuffled his papers, and tried the only play he had. "Your Honor," he said, his voice straining, "the defense argues that this entire proceeding is the result of a vindictive ex-wife. Ms. Vance," he gestured to me, "was, by her own sister's testimony, suspicious. She was angry about her husband's infidelity. This mountain of evidence, it's nothing but a high-tech, elaborate revenge fantasy from a woman scorned. He was trying to paint me as the mastermind, that my grandmother's entire life's work was a lie I had concocted in the week since I'd been fired." The courtroom murmured. The judge looked at him, unamused. David's lawyer sat down, looking like he had just run a marathon. The judge looked at Annalise. "Ms. Harding, Does your client have any response to the claim that this is a personal vendetta? Annalise stood up. She was the picture of calm. She hadn't even brought her briefcase. Your Honor, she said, her voice cutting through the room. My client, Ms. Vance, has no response. Her actions speak for themselves. She turned, just slightly, to face the defense table. The defense claims my client is acting out of malice. The defense claims she is a scorned woman on a revenge fantasy. The record, however, shows a different story. She looked at David, her gaze flat and cold. The record shows that the defendant, Mr. Morrow, repeatedly referred to my client, his wife, as poor, as weak, as nothing. He built his entire case for discarding her around the idea that she had no ambition, no resources, and no power. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Today, my client, Elara Vance, sits here, her name cleared, her reputation restored, and her finances, which are, I must add, her own, are perfectly intact. Then, she gestured to David, the defendant, Mr. Morrow, a man who stole millions of dollars, a man who lived in a glass house and drove a Maserati, sits before you today in a borrowed suit, unable to afford his own counsel. He is, quite literally, bankrupt. She turned back to the judge. The defense calls my client poor and vindictive. I call the defendant a liar and a thief. The evidence, as Mr. Croft so beautifully stated, speaks for itself. We rest. Your Honor. It was a kill shot, a public execution using only the truth. David's face, which had been gray, was now a deep, mottled red. He stared at Annalise, his mouth open, a silent scream of pure, impotent hatred. The judge looked at David's lawyer. Do you have anything else, counsel? The young lawyer just shook his head, defeated. I thought not, the judge said. She picked up her gavel. I have heard the testimony. I have seen the evidence. I am dismissing all arguments from the defense. The judge did not retire to her chambers. She didn't need to. She picked up the sheaf of papers in front of her, her face a mask of judicial authority. The entire courtroom held its breath. This court is now ruling on several matters, she began, her voice clear and carrying to the back row. First, regarding the petition for divorce, case number 882224. Given the overwhelming evidence of fraud, misrepresentation, and criminal intent ab initio, this court finds that a valid marriage contract never existed. My breath caught. Annalise put a calming hand on my arm. The marriage between Elara Vance and David Morrow is hereby annulled on the grounds of fraud. The judge declared, all assets acquired during the union, which are now determined to be liabilities and debts, are the sole responsibility of Mr. Morrow. Ms. Vance is absolved of any and all financial entanglements. She will leave this marriage as she entered it a party with no legal connection to the defendant. I was free. It was a clean cut. No divorce. An annulment. As if he had never existed. The judge continued, her eyes scanning the room. Second, regarding the state criminal charges against Ms. Elara Vance for the theft of $50,000 from the Archway Initiative, based on the testimony of Ms. Chloe Vance and the irrefutable report from Mr. Croft, all charges are dismissed with prejudice. The court declares Ms. Elara Vance entirely innocent of all accusations. A quiet, relieved sigh rippled through the gallery. Mark Reynolds, from the Archway, who was sitting in the back, just nodded, his face a picture of grim acceptance. Third, regarding the defendant, Ms. Chloe Vance, my sister, who had been staring at her lap, flinched. This court finds you guilty of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, aiding and abetting, and perjury. However, I am weighing your complete and, by all accounts, vital cooperation with the prosecution, which was instrumental in dismantling this disgusting enterprise. The judge looked at her, a long, hard stare. You betrayed your sister. You threw your life away for a man who would have left you to rot. That is a prison of its own. I sentence you to 5 years. Suspended. You will serve 5 years of probation, 1,000 hours of community service, and you will pay restitution from any and all future earnings. Do you understand me? Ms. Vance. Yes, Your Honor, Chloe whispered, her voice breaking. She was getting a second chance. It was more than I would have given her, but it was just... Finally, the judge said, setting her papers down and clasping her hands. Mr. David Morrow. She fixed her gaze on him. He, who had once commanded rooms with his charisma, now looked like a small, trapped animal. You are found guilty on all counts. Grand larceny, conspiracy to commit fraud, multiple counts of wire fraud against the elderly, perjury. You are, Mr. Morrow, a predator of the worst kind. You took, not from the rich, but from the vulnerable. You destroyed lives, pensions, and the fragile trust of your community. You targeted a respected nonprofit. You systematically, and with malice, planned the financial and reputational destruction of your own wife. It is the finding of this court that you are a menace, and you have not shown one iota of remorse. The judge paused. On the count of grand larceny, 5 years. On the counts of wire fraud, 10 years. On the count of perjury, 5 years. The sentences for wire fraud and perjury will run concurrently, but will be served consecutively to the grand larceny charge. This court sentences you, David Morrow, to a total of 15 years in the state penitentiary. A gasp went up from the gallery. 15 years! The bailiff moved, unlocking David's handcuffs from the table and pulling him to his feet. And that's when he finally broke. The last vestige of his composure, his control, shattered. He swiveled, his face a mask of such pure, ugly hatred it was barely human. His eyes found mine. You, he screamed, his voice raw. You did this. You ruined me. You're just a nothing, a broke, penniless, poor, nobody. The court officer tried to pull him, but he was rooted, his final impotent rage directed entirely at me. You're just a poor girl. That's all you'll ever be. I stood up. I didn't have to. Annalise didn't tell me to. I stood up, slowly, and I met his gaze. The courtroom was silent, watching this final, desperate confrontation. I let him look. I let him see the woman he thought he had crushed. And then I spoke, my voice not loud, but clear, cutting through his rage, carrying to every corner of the room. You said I was too poor for you, I said, my voice steady. Turns out, my $600,000 of poverty was just enough to shut you down. His face went from red to a shocked, ashen white. He had no idea what I was talking about, but he understood the number. He understood the power. The bailiff yanked his arm. Let's go, Morrow. They dragged him, still staring at me in disbelief, toward the courtroom's side exit. He was cuffed, a convicted felon, his life over. But the final act was not mine. It was my grandmother's. As the bailiff pushed open the door to the hallway, 2 men were standing there. They were not court officers. They were in dark, immaculate suits. They flashed badges. David Morrow. The taller one asked, his voice flat, all business. The bailiff, confused, stopped. He's in state custody. He's in our custody now, the agent said. He stepped forward, taking the state-issued cuffs off and replacing them with his own. David, dazed, just stared. Who are you? SEC, Federal Fraud Task Force, the agent said. David Morrow, you are under arrest for federal securities fraud, interstate wire fraud, and multiple violations of the Investment Advisors Act. Your state trial was just the opening act. It was the anonymous call. My call. The federal investigation, separate from the state, had concluded, and they had waited. They had waited for the state to convict him, and now, They were taking him for their turn. He wasn't just going to prison. He was going to a federal prison. For a very, very long time. They led him away. A man twice cuffed, twice convicted, utterly destroyed by a web he never knew existed. I turned. I picked up my purse. I nodded to Annalise. I nodded to Julian. I walked past the gallery, past the reporters, past the apologies of my former colleagues, and I stepped out of the courthouse. The Denver sun was bright, the air thin and clean. I had walked into that building a victim. I walked out as Alara Vance. I still had the remainder of my fund. I had my name back, and I had, finally, honored my grandmother's legacy. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so please comment below and share your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.